The road to the farmhouse wound like a cracked ribbon through the empty Connecticut countryside. The year was 1965. Autumn had stripped the trees bare, leaving only twisted black branches against a gray sky. A cold wind carried the smell of damp soil and something faintly metallic, like old blood. At the end of the road stood the house. It was a two-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling in long strips like curling skin. The windows were dark, empty rectangles, and the roof sagged as if the house itself were tired of standing. Behind it stretched acres of dying grass and a crumbling stone wall, the only barrier between the property and the woods beyond. Inside lived the Anderson family, Thomas, his wife Ruth, and their two children, Lily and Michael. They had moved in less than a year ago, eager for a fresh start in the countryside. But the house had not welcomed them. At first, it was subtle, a door creaking open at night, faint whispers when no one was around. Then came the shadows sliding across walls, the smell of rotten rooms that had been freshly cleaned, and the sensation of invisible hands brushing against their skin as they slept. Little Lily had begun screaming at night, pointing at a corner of her room where the man with no face stood watching her. Michael, barely older, refused to sleep at all. By October, the family had reached their breaking point. Thomas, once a practical man who dismissed superstition, now locked every door and window at night and kept a Bible under his pillow. Ruth walked the halls at dawn with tears in her eyes, murmuring prayers. They needed help, real help. That's when they wrote a desperate letter to Ed and Lorraine Warren, a husband and wife team known throughout New England for investigating haunted places. Ed was a demonologist, a steady, grounded man who faced darkness with a soldier's resolve. Lorraine was a clairvoyant, able to see and feel things most people couldn't. They had handled dozens of cases by then, but something about the Andersons' letter unsettled them. On a cold November afternoon, Ed and Lorraine drove up the long, cracked driveway in their black Chevrolet. The moment Lorraine stepped out of the car, she froze. Her breath misted in the air, though the day wasn't cold enough for frost. The house loomed before them like a waiting predator. Lorraine whispered, almost to herself, "It's watching us." Inside, Ruth greeted them at the door. Her eyes were hollow from sleepless nights. "Thank God you came," she said, voice trembling. As they stepped over the threshold, Ed felt a sudden heaviness in his chest, as though the air had thickened. Lorraine gripped his arm tightly. In the parlor, the children sat silently on the couch, staring at nothing. The house was still, too still. Ed began his routine questions. When did the disturbances start? What had they seen? While Lorraine's gaze roamed the dim corners of the room. She saw flickers of movement, like heat mirages, and shadows bending where they shouldn't. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "There's something here with you, and it doesn't want us here." Outside, the wind rose suddenly, rattling the loose panes of glass in the windows. Somewhere upstairs, a door creaked open on its own. The farmhouse seemed to exhale, as if it knew the Warrens had arrived. And then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a child's laughter echoing from the empty hallway, though both children were sitting right there in front of them. Lorraine's eyes widened. Ed glanced at her, jaw tight. They hadn't even unpacked their equipment yet, but the house had already made its presence known. The Warrens were in. The farmhouse was awake. The sun had dipped below the tree line, leaving the sky a bruised purple. The wind picked up as dusk deepened into night, and the Anderson farmhouse creaked like a ship lost at sea. Ed and Lorraine Warren had agreed to stay overnight to witness the disturbances for themselves. In the parlor, Ruth Anderson set out coffee on the table with shaking hands. The children had been put to bed hours ago, but their muffled whimpers still drifted down the hallway. Ed and Lorraine sat opposite Thomas and Ruth, their tape recorder and notepads on the coffee table. The Warrens had been inside hundreds of haunted houses before, but there was something about this place, the way the shadows seemed to lean closer, the silence between sounds that felt different. Ed checked his watch. 11:32 p.m. Activity usually increases after midnight, he said calmly, though his eyes kept flicking toward the darkened hallway. Lorraine wasn't calm. She hadn't been since she stepped out of the car. She could feel the presence here like cold fingers brushing her spine. The house was alive, watching, listening, waiting. They began the evening with interviews. Ed asking the parents about the house's history while Lorraine walked slowly from room to room, her hand hovering over the walls as though reading invisible braille. Upstairs, the children's room smelled faintly of damp earth. In the kitchen, Lorraine's breath came out in small white clouds. She felt herself being pulled toward the old pantry door at the far end. Something behind it whispered her name. At midnight, the lights flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. "Stay calm," Ed said, his voice a steady anchor in the darkness. He reached into his bag for a flashlight. A beam of white light cut through the pitch black, revealing the parlor chairs, the coffee table, the frightened faces of the Andersons. Everything looked normal, too normal. Then came the sound. It started as a slow creaking upstairs, like someone walking back and forth in the children's room. Then a soft drag, as if something heavy were being pulled across the floor. The children screamed. Thomas leapt from his chair. "They're in their beds. They're in their beds." Ed snapped, "Stay here," and dashed up the staircase two at a time, Lorraine at his heels. The hallway was dark, lined with faded wallpaper. The sound of dragging stopped the moment they reached the landing. Ed pushed open the children's door. The two kids sat bolt upright in their beds, pale and trembling. "He was here," Lily whispered, clutching her blanket. "The man with no face." Lorraine's eyes darted to the far corner of the room. The shadows there seemed thicker, almost liquid, like smoke gathering but not dispersing. She heard a low growl vibrating at the edge of her hearing. Then, before anyone could move, the toy horse in the corner began to rock on its own. Slowly at first, then harder. Then it toppled over with a crash. Ruth screamed from downstairs. Ed turned, ready to run back down, but the bedroom door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. The lights flickered once and went out again. Total darkness. Lorraine's hand shot out, clutching Ed's arm. "It's here," she hissed. "It's with us now." The temperature dropped so fast their breath came out in clouds. Ed fumbled for his crucifix. Lorraine closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind. Images flashed: men in robes, candles burning, symbols carved into the earth beneath the house. She gasped. Downstairs, every door in the house began slamming open and shut. The sound echoed like gunshots. Plates shattered in the kitchen, the air filled with the smell of rot. Suddenly, the bedroom window rattled violently, the old glass bowing inward as though something outside was trying to force its way in. Lorraine heard a whisper, low and venomous, curling around her thoughts. "Get out. This is mine." Ed pulled the door open with a hard shove. The hallway beyond was empty but icy cold, the floorboards creaking under invisible weight. "We're moving everyone into one room," he barked. "Now." They gathered in the parlor, huddled together. The house fell silent again, as if it had done just enough to remind them who was in charge. Lorraine's hands trembled as she lit a blessed candle on the table. "This isn't just a spirit," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "This is something ancient, something that was fed here. It's not going to stop." Ed's jaw tightened. "Then we won't stop either." As if mocking his words, a child's laugh echoed through the parlor again. This time, it came from directly behind Ed. He spun around, but there was nothing there. The candle flickered and went out. The farmhouse had only just begun. Morning came gray and thin, a weak light seeping through the crooked window panes. The Anderson family had barely slept. They huddled at the kitchen table, their eyes hollow from the night's terror. Ed and Lorraine Warren sat across from them, their equipment spread out: tape recorders, cameras, crucifixes, blessed candles. The farmhouse looked deceptively normal in daylight. Dust motes drifted through beams of sunlight. The old clock ticked in the hallway, but Lorraine could feel it. The entity wasn't gone. It was hiding, waiting for the dark to return. Ed poured black coffee into paper cups. "We're not leaving," he told Thomas and Ruth firmly. "Not until we know what we're dealing with." Lorraine walked slowly to the center of the living room, closed her eyes, and extended her hands. She had done this in dozens of haunted places, but the weight she felt here was heavier than anything before. Her heartbeat slowed, her breath fogged the air, even though the room was warm. Images began to flash behind her eyelids. She saw the farmhouse as it once was, not bright and sunlit, but dark, candlelit. Hooded figures stood in a circle in the basement, their faces hidden. hands joined. They were chanting in a language older than English. Something lay at their feet. An animal, its blood pooling on the dirt floor. Symbols carved into the beams glowed faintly with red light. Lorraine gasped, clutching her chest. Her voice was hoarse. "It's not just a haunting," she whispered. "It's a desecration. This land was used for ritual sacrifice long before the farmhouse was built. The blood bound something here." The temperature in the room plummeted. Everyone could see their breath now. The blessed candle flickered violently, though no window was open. Ed's knuckles whitened around his crucifix. Suddenly, the tape recorder clicked on by itself, though no one had touched it. A voice, deep, guttural, as something trying to speak through mud, came through the speaker. "Mine, all mine." The Anderson children began to cry. Ruth pulled them close. Thomas muttered prayers under his breath. The candle flame shot upward, stretching like a thin finger, then snuffed out. The farmhouse plunged into silence. Then came the scratching. It started softly at first, a faint clawing at the walls, the sound of nails dragging across old wood. Then it grew louder, circling the room, faster and faster, as though something were running inside the walls. Plaster cracked. Dust fell from the ceiling. Ed barked, "Stay together," and reached for his bag. He pulled out a small vial of holy water. Lorraine dropped to her knees, her eyes rolling back, whispering words only she could hear. She saw more visions. A woman, pale and wild-eyed, standing in the woods behind the house, her hands stained with blood. A pit in the earth filled with bones. A name carved into a stone, Belial. Lorraine's voice came out cold and distant, as if someone else were speaking through her. "It's not a ghost. It's a demon. It's been here for centuries. It's hungry." Suddenly, the kitchen cabinet doors flew open all at once, slamming against the walls with a thunderclap. Plates shattered on the floor. The cross above the doorway flipped upside down and cracked down the center. The air grew heavy, pressing on their chests. A low growl vibrated, the floorboards rising in pitch until it sounded almost like a scream. Shadows bled across the walls, twisting into long, clawed fingers. And then, for the first time, it showed itself. At the far end of the hallway, where the light didn't reach, a shape emerged tall and thin, its body flickering like smoke. It had no face, only a blank, pulsing void where its features should have been. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, watching them. The Anderson children shrieked. Ruth covered their eyes. Thomas fell to his knees. Lorraine forced herself to stand, pointing at the figure. "I know who you are," she said, her voice trembling. "You were called here, you were fed here, but this is not your home anymore." The figure hissed, the sound like air escaping a grave. The walls trembled. Ed stepped forward with the holy water, but before he could move another inch, the figure rushed down the hallway with impossible speed, the lights exploding as it passed. It stopped just short of the living room, looming over them, its form swirling like a storm cloud. Everything went silent except for the children's sobs. Then it whispered, directly into their ears, "You cannot cast me out." The windows rattled, the floor heaved. The farmhouse seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Ed gritted his teeth. "We'll see about that." Lorraine grabbed his arm. "It's time. We can't wait any longer." Outside, the sky had darkened as though a storm were gathering, though the weather report had promised clear skies. Inside, the farmhouse prepared for war. Harpa. The storm broke at nightfall. Wind howled through the leafless trees, rattling the farmhouse shutters like skeletal fingers. Thunder rolled far off, though no lightning flashed. Inside, the Anderson family, Ed and Lorraine, had barricaded themselves in the parlor. Blessed candles burned on every table, their thin flames fighting to hold steady in the heavy, unnatural air. The Warrens had seen hauntings escalate before, but never like this. The farmhouse pulsed with the pressure that made their ears pop. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like footsteps, every gust of wind like a low growl. Ed laid his Bible and crucifix on the table. He filled a small brass aspergillum with holy water and tested the sprayer. His face was pale but determined. "It knows we're preparing," he said, eyes fixed on the hallway. "It'll try to stop us." Lorraine knelt in front of the family, murmuring a prayer. Her hands shook as she tucked a blessed medal into each child's palm. "Don't let go of these," she whispered, "no matter what you see." At 12:01 a.m., the house began to change. The blessed candles flickered, their flames stretching unnaturally tall. The temperature plunged, so cold that Ruth's breath came out in white plumes. The old clock in the hallway chimed once, twice, then cracked down the middle with a sharp snap. From the kitchen came a sound, a dragging, wet and heavy, like something crawling across the floor. Then a knock at the wall behind them. Once, twice, 3 times. The lights went out. Darkness flooded the room, thick as oil. The children whimpered. Thomas clutched Ruth's hand. Lorraine's voice was a tight thread of sound. "It's here." Ed rose, crucifix in one hand, holy water in the other. "Stay behind me," he commanded. Then came the growl, deep and resonant. It vibrated the floorboards, rattled the glass in the windows, and seemed to echo from everywhere at once. The blessed candles hissed and went out, plunging them into complete blackness. Something moved in the hall, slow, deliberate, scraping across the floor. The smell of rot filled the air, stronger than before, tinged with sulfur. Lorraine's eyes rolled back as she reached out with her mind. She saw flashes again: the cult in the basement, a blood-soaked altar, a shadow descending into the earth, like smoke being inhaled. She saw the name carved into the soil, Belial. Her voice came out in a whisper not her own. "Belial, ancient one, bound to this ground, fed by blood." The sound of scratching grew louder, closer, till it was right outside the parlor door. Ed began the exorcism prayer. His voice was steady, rising above the noise. "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave this place. You are not welcome here. You will harm no one else." The door slammed open with a force that splintered the wood. It entered. The shadow towered over them, taller than any man, its body flickering like a storm cloud, claws stretching and retracting like knives. Where its face should have been was only a hollow void, a darkness that seemed to pull the light into it. The children screamed. Ruth covered their eyes. Ed stepped forward, sprinkling holy water in a wide arc. The droplets hissed in the air, releasing a sharp, acrid smell. The shadow shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and the walls shook. Lorraine held her rosary tight, calling on the Archangel Michael, her voice rising. "Defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil." The demon lunged. A blast of icy wind knocked over chairs and shattered the remaining glass in the windows. Thomas fell to his knees, clutching the Bible to his chest. Ed kept reading, louder now, pushing against the storm. The crucifix in his hand grew warm, almost burning. He raised it high, shouting the final lines of the prayer. The demon writhed, its form flickering violently. The smell of sulfur grew overpowering. The walls of the farmhouse seemed to bend inward, as if the entire structure were breathing. Lorraine saw an opening, a crack in the darkness. "Say its name," she cried to Ed. "Name it, and cast it out." Ed's voice thundered. "Belial, by the authority of Christ, I command you to leave this place." The shadow froze, its clawed arms outstretched. A scream erupted from the void where its face should be. A sound so loud the glass shattered from every window at once. The floorboards split, revealing the dirt beneath. For a moment, they all saw the basement as it had been. The altar, the bones, the rituals. Ed kept shouting the prayer. Lorraine joined in, her voice breaking but strong. The children clutched their medals, eyes squeezed shut. The shadow began to dissolve, smoke tearing away from its form like ashes in the wind. It reached toward them one last time, claws inches from Ed's chest, before it erupted in a burst of icy air and vanished. Silence. The farmhouse was still again. The blessed candles flickered back to life one by one. The smell of sulfur began to fade. The air felt lighter, as if a weight had lifted. Lorraine dropped to her knees, sobbing in exhaustion. Ed put a hand on her shoulder, his own face pale and damp with sweat. "It's not over," she whispered. "It's gone for now, but the land is still marked. It will always be marked." Ed looked at the Anderson family, huddled together, shaking, but alive. "We've bought you peace," he said quietly, "but you'll need to decide if you can live here after what's happened." Outside, the wind had stopped. The sky was clear, the stars sharp and cold above the fields. Inside, the farmhouse exhaled. For the first time in decades, it was empty. Morning arrived pale and thin, the first sunlight creeping over the Connecticut fields like a timid visitor. The Anderson farmhouse looked strangely quiet, almost peaceful, as if nothing had happened the night before. But the people inside knew better. The Anderson family sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in blankets, their eyes red from crying and exhaustion. The children clutched the blessed medals Lorraine had given them, refusing to let go. The house felt lighter, the crushing weight of the presents gone, but a faint echo still lingered, a hollow coldness that clung to the corners. Ed Warren stood by the window, his crucifix hanging loose in one hand. He stared at the yard, at the line of trees swaying gently in the morning wind. Lorraine sat across from the family, her hands folded tightly, knuckles white. She was trembling, though she tried to hide it. "It's over," Thomas said at last, voice cracking. "It's gone, right?" Ed turned from the window, his face lined with fatigue. "For now," he said carefully, "we've forced it out. But the land here, the rituals, the blood, it's been marked for a long time. That kind of darkness leaves a stain." Ruth tightened her arms around her children. "You mean it could come back?" Lorraine's soft voice answered before Ed could. "Not if you leave. Not if you don't feed it with fear. But staying here is like living on a battlefield after the war. The scars don't go away." The family looked around at the kitchen, the cracked walls, the old wood floorboards, as if seeing it for the first time. The house that had been their dream now felt like a trap, a tomb that had been opened. Upstairs, the children's room was quiet. The toy horse sat upright where it had fallen, its painted eyes staring at the window. The smell of rot had faded, but faint scratches still marred the walls, marks too deep to be from any animal. Ed and Lorraine packed their equipment slowly, methodically, like soldiers after a battle. Tape recorders clicked off. Crucifixes were wrapped in cloth. The blessed candles, burned almost to the base, were snuffed one by one. Before leaving, Lorraine walked through the house alone. She placed a hand on the doorframe of each room, murmuring quiet prayers. In the parlor, she stopped. For a moment, she thought she heard a faint laugh, like a child's, far away. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Outside, the Warrens' black Chevrolet waited at the end of the gravel driveway. The sky was clear now, the storm completely gone. The farmhouse stood in the sunlight, white paint peeling, windows like blank eyes. Ruth approached them at the porch steps, her face drawn but grateful. "Thank you," she said simply. "You don't have to thank us," Ed replied. "Just make the right choice for your family." The children came out onto the porch, holding hands. Lily looked at Lorraine. "Will the man with no face come back?" she asked softly. Lorraine crouched down, meeting the girl's eyes. "Not if you're brave," she said. "And not if you don't stay here." The girl nodded solemnly. The Warrens got into their car and started the engine. As they drove away down the winding road, Lorraine looked back at the farmhouse. In the rearview mirror, it seemed to shimmer for a moment, as if the sunlight couldn't quite touch it. "Another one for the files," Ed murmured. Lorraine's eyes stayed fixed on the shrinking silhouette of the house. This one will never leave me," she said quietly. Back at their home in Monroe, Connecticut, Ed would write the case up for their records. Lorraine would add her notes visions of the rituals, the name she had heard whispered, the blank face of the entity. They would file it away in their archive with dozens of others. But the Connecticut farmhouse case would become one of their most chilling memories. Months later, the Anderson family moved away, leaving the house empty. It sat there for years, weathering storms, watching the road. Local kids would dare each other to run up to the porch at night. They said if you listened closely, you could still hear a child laughing from somewhere inside. And sometimes, when the sky turned dark and the wind blew just right, the farmhouse seemed to exhale again, as if something deep beneath its foundation was still breathing. The end. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Horror Dream. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to The Horror Dream, and we'll bring you more darkness, just for you. If you enjoy a little chill down your spine, stick around, like, share, and hit that subscribe button, right here on The Horror Dream. Your support keeps us going, so stay with us. Subscribe to The Horror Dream for more spine-tingling tales.